America is trapped in a war with Iran that it can't win. The United States fired more than 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles into Iran in 30 days. Each one costs up to $3.6 million. The country produces roughly 90 to 100 of them per year. That means the Pentagon just burned through 5 to 8 years of Tomahawk production in a single month. 13 American service members are dead. More than 300 are wounded. The USS Gerald R. Wended. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most expensive warship ever constructed, has pulled out of the fight, and Iran is still standing and launching retaliation attacks daily. In the next few minutes, I am going to break down Iran's secret weapon, why the US can't win, and what 30 days of this war have revealed about America's power. The strategy Iran is running right now was not improvised. It was designed over the course of 4 decades, starting after the Iran-Iraq War ended in 1988. That 8-year war taught Iran a permanent lesson. You do not fight the West head-on. You spread out. You build leverage in places your enemy cannot easily reach. And that is exactly what Iran did. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, militia networks embedded across Syria. For 30 years, Iran planted pieces across the board while the rest of the world focused on its nuclear program. What the United States confronted on the 28th of February, when it launched Operation Epic Fury alongside Israel, was not the old Iran. America expected a decapitation strike to end this quickly. Nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei killed. IRGC commanders eliminated. Air defenses destroyed. The Pentagon described the opening salvo as twice the firepower of the 2003 shock and owie campaign against Iraq, and for a brief moment, it looked like it worked. But Iran did not collapse. The government kept functioning. The missiles kept launching. And Iran activated a pressure system across the entire region that no amount of Tomahawk missiles can switch off. We need to talk about exactly how that system works, because the cost numbers alone will change the way you understand this war. A single Iranian Shahed 136 drone costs between $20,000 and $50,000. It is a motorized glider packed with explosives assembled from off-the-shelf commercial parts. The Patriot PAC-3 interceptor that the U.S. and Gulf states use to shoot it down costs approximately $4 million. The THAAD interceptor, which handles higher altitude threats, runs between $12 million and $15 million per shot. The cost exchange is heavily in Iran's favor, often tens or even hundreds of times cheaper for the attacker than the defender. Iran has sent more than 2,000 of these drones into the region since the 28th of February. The Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated that coalition forces burned through $1.7 billion in interceptors in just the first 100 hours. Across the first 16 days of this conflict, the combined interceptor bill for the United States, Israel, and the Gulf countries reached approximately $26 billion. And here is the detail that should alarm every defense planner on Earth. Lockheed Martin manufactures roughly 600 Patriot interceptors annually. That production rate cannot be scaled quickly because the supply chain relies on single-source suppliers with lead times measured in months. Before Operation Epic Fury even started, Patriot stockpiles had already dropped to 25% of the level the Pentagon considered adequate, drained by the 12-day war in June 2025 and the extended Houthi campaign in the Red Sea. Now here is what most people assume. They think this war is defined by the air campaign over Iran. Thousands of sorties, 11,000. Targets struck by U.S. Central Command. All of that firepower pouring into Iranian territory around the clock. In reality, the decisive front of this war is not over Iran. It is a 21-mile wide strip of water between Iran and Oman, called the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran locked it down without firing a single anti-ship missile. What Iran did instead was deceptively simple. A small number of drone strikes on merchant vessels near the strait triggered a cascade through the global insurance market. By the 5th of March, every major marine insurer had pulled war risk coverage for vessels transiting the Gulf. No coverage means no commercial shipping. Tanker traffic collapsed by 70% almost immediately. Then it fell to functionally zero. Over 150 ships dropped anchor outside the strait and refused to move. The IRGC confirmed the closure on the 2nd of March and declared any vessel entering the waterway would be targeted. No ship owner on Earth could afford to send a tanker through without insurance. Analysts are calling this a phantom blockade, a situation where the financial system locks down the waterway before any physical barrier is needed. Commodity traders scrambled to assemble $7 billion in emergency credit to avoid forced liquidations. European banks refused letters of credit for any cargo dependent on Hormuz transit. This was not a disruption. It was a shutdown of the entire commercial artery. 20 million barrels of oil per day typically flow through that strait. That is 20% of the world's daily supply and about 20% of global liquefied natural gas trade. More than $500 billion in energy commerce passes through there every year. When Iran choked it off, Brent crude surged from around $70 per barrel before the war to above $107. That is a gain of more than 50% in 30 days. The International Energy Agency called it the largest disruption to energy supply in the history of the global oil market. The IEA's 32 member nations agreed unanimously to release 400 million barrels from emergency reserves. It barely dented the trajectory. On top of the Hormuz crisis, Iran built 2 additional layers of pressure that operate simultaneously. The first is direct military punishment on Israel. Waves of ballistic missiles and drones have struck Tel Aviv and targets near Ben Gurion Airport. Iran's military confirmed it hit an electronic warfare and radar installation at Haifa's aerospace complex, along with fuel storage at Ben Gurion. The second layer targets the Gulf Arab states that host American forces. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman have all absorbed Iranian strikes. The UAE Ministry of Defense reported 941 Iranian drones detected since the war started. 65 of those penetrated its defenses and struck ports, airports, hotels, and data centers. An Iranian missile attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia wounded multiple American service members. These are not accidental patterns. They are designed to fracture the coalition that America needs. Most people assume Iran is just lashing out. In reality, Iran is running a coordinated 3-axis campaign. Military strikes drain interceptor reserves. Gulf state attacks erode political support for the war among the very allies hosting American bases. And the Hormuz shutdown converts all of that into economic pain that reaches every voter, every gas station, and every stock exchange. Iran does not need to win a single battle. It needs to keep all 3 axes running until the cost becomes politically unsurvivable. U.S. stock markets have already fallen roughly 10% from pre-war highs. The OECD slashed its global growth forecast from 3.3% down to 2.9% and raised G20 inflation projections to 4%, the Philippines declare. At a national energy emergency, Australia made public transport free in 2 states just to offset fuel prices. The Gulf region produces close to half the world's urea and roughly 30% of global ammonia output. 1/3 of the planet's fertilizer supply transits through the Strait of Hormuz. Urea prices have climbed 50% since the war started. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizers sustain approximately 48% of global food production. The mid-April deadline for Northern Hemisphere planting means any disruption in March translates directly into reduced crop yields. By September, Europe is already facing scarcity pricing on diesel. The Pentagon itself is one of the world's largest fuel consumers, and a $10 per barrel increase in oil raises its annual operating costs by an estimated $1.3 billion. This war is not just costing the military budget. It is repricing the global economy in real time. The Gulf states are not only petro-states, they are saltwater kingdoms, societies that survive by converting seawater into drinking water on an industrial scale. More than 90% of Kuwait's and Bahrain's potable water comes from desalination plants, roughly 86% of Oman's, 80% of Israel's, about 70% of Saudi Arabia's. Across the Gulf, More than 400 desalination facilities supply water to approximately 100 million people. Over 90% of that output comes from just 56 megaplanes clustered along coastlines within easy drone and missile range of Iran. Attacks on this infrastructure have already begun. Bahrain reported an Iranian drone hit on one of its own plants. Kuwait and the UAE have both logged indirect damage near desalination sites. The Iranian parliament warned publicly that if Iran's power infrastructure were targeted, Iran would pursue the irreversible destruction of the Gulf's desalination and energy facilities. Iran itself runs on rivers, dams, and groundwater. It is far less dependent on coastal desalination than any of its neighbors. That asymmetry is the leverage. Now look at the military toll from America's side of the ledger. 30 days in. 13 U.S. service members killed. Over 300 wounded. 6 soldiers died in a single attack on Port Shuaibah in Kuwait. Current reporting points to more than a dozen MQ-9s destroyed or damaged. 3 F-15E lost in a friendly fire incident. A damaged F-35A, a fatal KC-135 crash in Iraq, and additional tankers damaged on the ground. 5 more KC-135S were damaged by Iranian missiles at an airfield in Saudi Arabia. The first 6 days alone cost $11.3 billion, according to a closed-door Pentagon briefing to Congress. Donald Trump has requested $200 billion from Congress to continue this campaign. Public support remains weak. In the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, 35% approved of the U.S. strikes on Iran and 61% disapproved. On the 28th of March, the war expanded again. Yemen's Houthis fired ballistic missiles at Israel for the first time since the conflict began. Air raid sirens sounded in Beersheba. The missiles were intercepted, but the Houthis announced they would continue striking until the aggression on all resistance fronts stops. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea is 16 miles wide. About 12% of global trade passes through it. Saudi Arabia has been rerouting millions of barrels of crude through Red Sea ports because Hormuz is closed. If the Houthis now shut down Bab el-Mandeb the way they disrupted it during the Gaza war, when they attacked over 100 merchant vessels and forced Suez Canal traffic down by 70%, then both major Middle Eastern energy corridors go dark at the same time. Last year, the U.S. spent $1 billion bombing Houthi positions. The group sank 2 more ships after the bombing stopped. 2,500 Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit arrived in the region on the 28th of March. Elements of the 82nd Airborne have also deployed, but military analysts warn that these forces can establish forward positions they cannot sustain in contested territory. The United States launched the largest air campaign since 2003. It killed Iran's supreme leader. It struck over 11,000 targets. And 30 days later, Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz. It is still launching missiles. It is still draining American interceptor stockpiles with drones that cost less than a mid-range car. The war bill has passed $18 billion, and the request to Congress is $200 billion. The USS Gerald R. Ford has been pulled from frontline operations. Fertilizer prices are up 50%. Oil is above $107 a barrel. The Houthis just opened another front. Not a single country on earth has joined the U.S. in a combat coalition. The stated objective was regime change. The regime survived. The stated objective was to neutralize Iranian military power. Iran fires more ordnance into the region today than it did in week 1. And now, as we enter day 31, the diplomatic back channel is finally cracking open. Pakistan has stepped forward as a potential mediator, announcing it is prepared to host direct talks between Washington and Tehran. President Trump indicated that Iran has already agreed to a significant portion of a 15-point list of American demands conveyed through Islamabad. But Iran's foreign minister responded by calling Washington's sudden shift toward dialogue a quiet admission that its military objectives have failed. On the economic front, the pressure keeps tightening on ordinary Americans. The U.S. Postal Service announced a new fuel surcharge on all packages, passing the cost of this war directly to American consumers. That is not an abstract number. That is every household, in America paying a war tax every time they receive a delivery. At the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has begun selectively allowing transit for what it calls non-hostile vessels, but it is charging large fees and coordinating passage through its forces near Larik Island. 2 major cargo ships were tracked making sharp U-turns after approaching the zone this week, signaling that even major global powers are navigating carefully around Iran's terms. Meanwhile, a fully loaded oil tanker was struck by Iranian forces while anchored near Dubai, raising fears of a major environmental disaster in the Gulf. At Iran's only operating nuclear power plant in Bushehr, Russian technicians have been evacuating in stages. Over 160 specialist staff have already departed, with the facility now running on minimum personnel. The UN nuclear watchdog expressed deep alarm over reported strikes near the site. President Trump confirmed he is still weighing whether to seize Iran's Karg Island, the hub responsible for 90% of Iran's oil exports. But Iran's senior security officials responded with a direct warning. Any U.S. ground operation inside Iranian territory would trigger consequences far beyond what Washington has planned for. Iran has now launched a volunteer registration campaign inside Tehran, open to participants as young as 12 for security and support roles. The question is not whether Iran can outlast the bombs. The question is whether America can outlast the bill. The question is whether the United States can afford to keep prosecuting a war with no coalition, no exit, no defined victory, and an adversary whose entire doctrine was built around a single idea: do not win, just do not lose.